Hello noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, always here trying to give you the most unbiased possible interpretation and evaluation of articles that talk about history, making sure that what you're being told is not only historically accurate, is not pushed by political agendas, regardless of where they come from, and whatever information is being delivered is based on real and correct analysis of data based on documented facts. So recently I received a few articles from you. In the previous episode of this series I talked about a few articles that were talking about or trying to push this idea that a burial mound within the Viking world, so the Old Norse, was showing that a lot of Viking warriors were in fact gender fluid and transgender warriors. I've already debunked this up here, but today we're actually looking on the other side, because apparently you sent me a few articles that talk about a statement made by Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, whereby he talked about the ancient Roman Empire. I think I know something I'm quite passionate about. And he said that the Roman Empire fell, allegedly, because of the gays. So in other words, it was engaging in homosexual behavior that caused the entire of the Roman Empire to fall.
Many historians, those who are objective, would look back and recognize and give some credit to the fall of Rome, to not only the deprivation of the society and the loss of morals, but also to the rampant, homosexual behavior that was condoned by the society.
Now, one thing I'd like to say about this statement, first of all, is that it's complete and utter nonsense. There are a lot of reasons why the Roman Empire fall, and definitely just saying, oh, it was because of the gays, is an extremely shallow statement that demonstrates that you have never opened properly a history book about ancient Romans, specifically this topic, in your life. Now, I'm not here to discuss politics. I don't talk about politics on this channel, and as you know, you're more than welcome to be here, whether you be left-wing, right-wing, centrist, or just apolitical. As long as you have a love for truth and real history, then here you are. More than welcome to have you. Fantastic to see you. But the idea of why the ancient Roman Empire fell is an actual very complex one, and I would like to provide you a very strong and academically based list of possible answers so that you can decide which one you think is the most probable. Let's go. The causes of the fall of the Roman Empire are multiple, difficult to summarize and put together into a pattern, and to this day they are not agreed upon by all scholars of the subject. However, one can try to construct a general discourse by analyzing various internal and external contributing factors, starting from the first attempts at analysis carried out by historiography. The first to address the issue in depth was the English scholar Edward Gibbon, according to whom the original cause of the fall of the empire was to be found in a generalized social crisis, which was reflected in several factors, all related to the protection of the state by its citizens. According to Gibbon, ease and wealth would have progressively distanced Roman citizens from military practice, who would have gradually delegated the defense of the empire to militias formed by barbarians. These militias, grown disproportionately in number and influence amid power struggles and a lack of foresight and planning capacity, would have led the empire to collapse. And even though this approach by Gibbon, which is considered to be just one of the possible explanations of the fall of the Roman Empire, is already multi-layered, and as you will see there will be other aspects, do keep in mind that it is now considered outdated and quite shallow itself, although in comparison to the idea of it was because they were all gay, it is already orders of magnitude more significant. Another aspect that Gibbons presents as a possible reason why the Roman Empire fell was in fact the spread of Christianity due to the inherent pacifism of this religion. Also in connection with the certainty of a better life after death, which would have further damped both the martial drive of the Romans and the willingness to sacrifice themselves on the battlefield for the stability of the empire. Now, the reason why this is quite discredited is because at the end of the day, medieval kingdoms were all Christians, and crusaders were more than happy to go and wage war, regardless of the actual pacifism taught in the sources and in the gospel. So to me, that's a moot point. Gibbon's vision, while certainly offering some interesting points of reasoning and having undeniably set a precedent for Roman historiography, is now dated and suffers from a series of ideological elements elements typical of his time. To the aversion to religion, which was characteristic of the Enlightenment environment, Gibbon adds archetypal categories that we now know to be the result of cliché and commonplaces, such as the soft and decadent imperial Roman, now rendered effeminate and warlike by too much luxury and ease, in contrast to the virile but impulsive and warmongering barbarian. Therefore, if any student wishes to sort of deepen their understanding of Gibbon's position, you need to keep in mind that his ideas and concepts must be analyzed through a critical eye and should be considered as a basis to build upon. According to the historian Giovanni Brizzi, the seed of the fall of the Roman Empire is formed in one of its moments of greatest splendor, when it is not yet an empire in the strict sense but a republic. Rome's victory over Hannibal in the Second Punic War effectively leaves the Romans the undisputed masters of the Mediterranean. In other words, the crumbling of Punic hegemony, which will never recover, will leave Rome without a sort of opponent or a counterbalancing within the Mediterranean basin, and the capital being injected with the war indemnities imposed on Carthage and the conquest of the silver mines of Spain will provide Rome with an economic capacity and impetus that will allow it to confront and subjugate a good part of the Hellenistic world in a relatively short time, with a consequent further enormous influx of capital. And of course, if you're interested in wanting to know exactly how the Romans managed to defeat the Greeks, you should check out this dedicated video, link in the description. In just under a century, Rome will enjoy an enormous increase in wealth and enter an economic system firmly based on plunder and assimilation, with an exponential domino effect that will, however, physiologically end in the 2nd century, when the desirable lands that could justify the growing expenses for the mobilization of the military machine have simply been exhausted or are within a military and politically solid system that is difficult to confront, namely the Sassanid Empire. At this point, Rome, in order to maintain its structure, must necessarily turn mainly towards agricultural production and to a lesser extent commercial activities, but it is evident that the standards established by the previously aggressive model of military economy are no longer sustainable in the medium term. All of this will lead to the economic crisis of the 3rd century, which will further exacerbate the already problematic relationship between the upper class and the elites and the rest of the populace of the empire. And this will lead to another problem, which will affect the management of an external problem, namely the migratory flows of the barbarians. With the end of the wars of conquest, the empire had to live off agriculture, but increasing the total agricultural resources were virtually impossible. The agricultural and industrial technology of the time was not as advanced as that of Europe in the late Middle Ages, making the process of resource production much more burdensome and inefficient. In other words, this economic decline in Europe was also caused by the excessive taxation and the fiscal burden that was borne by the producing classes, which reduced in its way, as a result, or a symptom should we say, the effective numbers of the agricultural population within the productive sense. Hence, the presence of a large and productive portion of the population, namely that assigned to the bureaucratic and military apparatus, further aggravated the fiscal burden and reduced the available agricultural workforce. The size of the empire, on the other hand, made an articulated bureaucratic apparatus a necessary element for its management, and the pressure of the barbarians at its borders made a large army equally necessary. At the same time, the discontent of some of the humblest strata of the population, caused by the continuous tax increase, gave rise to the outbreak of population revolts that, starting from the end of the 3rd century onward, first flared up in Gaul, then also in Africa and the Near East, carried out by entities respectively called Bagaudae, Circumcelliones, and Maratocupremi, which, beyond their respective local cultural peculiarities, seem to share a peasant origin, a rejection of imperial authority, considered incapable of managing the pressures of the barbarians, and at the same time perceived as overbearing and rapacious. These groups of rebels were also characterized by a very superficial urbanization and in some cases adherence to Christianity. Unlike what Gibbon expressed, Christianity does not appear to be so much one of the factors of the empire's decline, but rather in this initial phase of the crisis, it seems to continuously gain consensus among those most oppressed strata of society. In any case, the high instability caused by the peasant revolts, which will flare up with particularly virulence in the 5th century AD in Gaul, will lead to the need for a large and reactive military apparatus, which, from an economic point of view, will end up further aggravating the economic situation, now plunged into a vicious cycle. If you appreciate my content so far and wish to help ensure my ability to continue to tell it how it is, regardless of any possible backlash, please support this channel on Patreon. Any support helps me and my team of academics keep the channel strong and gives us the means to fight back against the political rewriting of history. Stand with us, form the wall, defend the truth. The term Barbaricum refers to a set of territories north of the Danube and east of the Rhine, inhabited mostly by Germanic but also Indo-Iranian peoples, such as the Sarmatians. We're usually used to imagining the Barbaricum as a uncivil, so uncivilized, sort of wild and most importantly antithetically opposed area compared to the Roman Empire, but that's not really the case. The way we should imagine Barbaricum of this period is to think of a place that was more like some sort of poor periphery in comparison to the center of the empire, but which was still very strongly culturally and most importantly technologically influenced by the Roman presence. This is a fundamental fact to keep in mind because the barbarians objectively never wanted to destroy Rome. The idea of the barbarian rising among the ruins and moving to demolish the foundation of the empire is the result of a romantic imagery, but has very little to do with historical reality. In reality, the barbarians always wanted to enter into the Roman system, and not necessarily in a violent way. Even before Rome became an empire, the mixed migrant communities of Germanic and Celtic peoples of the Cimbri and the Teutons, before giving battle to the legions of Gaius Marius, had insistently requested territories to settle within the Republic in exchange for their services as fighters, and only faced with the clear and repeated refusal of the Roman Senate would they resort to violence. And the same, as we know, will happen again with the Gothic people. So in order to understand the rather complicated relationship between Roman authorities and the Barbaricums, or the barbarian world, even though of course it's a case-by-case scenario, but we do need to keep in mind that this would be somewhat of a constant. These barbarians don't want to invade Rome to destroy it. Rome is in fact something not to be hated like we are often presented in movies and games, but it's something to be envied that they wanted to be a part of. A model to strive for, not something to destroy. Now of course we remember figures like Arminius, Vercingetorix and Queen Boudica who opposed Romanization, but if when Rome expanded its borders there were certainly members of the elite of the indigenous population who opposed the conquest, later the barbaric realities left outside often sought to work to become part of that economic and social structure they saw close to their borders and perceived as a desirable achievement. Faced with these movements aimed at infiltrating and pressing on the borders, the Romans initially show excellent management skills, and when it is not possible or profitable to eliminate these masses or to move manu militari, so with the army, as Gaius Marius had done, the Roman administration takes care of moving and relocating their barbaric tribes along the limes of the empire, so the external border, externally or immediately within its borders, managing and filtering their flow and ensuring that the different barbaric communities counterbalance and keep each other under control. And as a proof of this that is highly documented, we can discuss the concept of the foederati, which is those barbarian communities that were accepted within the Roman system, and they could either at the border or strictly within the border, they could belong to the economic system in exchange for their services at helping the Romans keeping the other barbarians that the Romans didn't want at bay. And they did. So much for barbarian brotherly love, relying on militias of barbaric extraction managers, at least temporarily, not to distract the population of the empire from production. And the large landowners end up paying the state taxes as a substitute for the military service of their agricultural colonists. And the capital thus injected is intended for the payment of the barbaric militias. And what this system ends up creating is not only that the Roman Empire is now utilizing these barbaric armies in the borders in order to keep the other barbarians at bay, and they pay them well, but what happens is that they also start promoting some of these now veteran warriors and soldiers and put them within the ranks of the citizen Roman armies, all the way up, sometimes even to the level of supreme commanders who were under the direct command of the emperor. That is a huge change with previously internalized and sort of citizen-only structures and schemes. This change also led to closer ties between the great senatorial families and the leaders of barbaric origins, including marriages that contributed to increasing their social status. The birth and proliferation of exponents of this new Romano-barbaric nobility, however, brings with it a germ of profound instability. The historian Giovanni Tabacco writes, "The assimilation of the Germans of senatorial dignity into the aristocracy of the empire might therefore appear perfect, but their origins was not forgotten, because it placed them in a special relationship with all the non-assimilated Germanic groups of the empire, present in a conspicuous way in the armed forces and within the empire population, now allies, now enemies of the empire." Having reviewed all of this in more details, a student can begin to understand the military and political implications of such new practices, which will be tremendous. There is, however, another piece of the puzzle that we can bring forth because it's rather interesting, and we find it in the book called History of Italy, a book written by Montanelli and Gervaso. In their book, which is quite frankly provocative, we can find some interesting truths. The critical and evidently unstable situation described so far was based on a clearly precocious balance, and if undoubtedly sooner or later any further destabilizing element would have manifested itself to kick off the real collapse of the empire, what plunged events into a frantic and destructive spiral was the appearance on the European scene of a new people, the Huns. Arriving from the northwestern borders of China, the Huns, originally a warrior aristocracy of perhaps Siberian, perhaps Turanian origin, had involved in their movements in the steppes of Eurasia a whole series of people. First, Turanians, then Indo-Iranian, finally Germanic, going to form a tremendous critical mass that struck with unprecedented force on the Barbaricum. With the unstoppable advance of the Hunnic horde, the migratory push of the Germanic population towards the borders of the empire, which was previously considered as an opportunity, it now becomes a painful necessity, and above all, increases exponentially in intensity and volume. Unable to manage a pressure that had grown so suddenly, the imperial authorities often failed to engage constructively with the migrant masses of the barbarians, often fleeing the Barbaricum and seeking protection from the Huns within the borders of the empire. And to this point, we can connect it to something that actually happened historically, which is the idea that a lot of these fleeing barbarians that were running away from the Huns of Germanic origins within the empire, well, they were exploited, they were taken prisoners, their loved ones captured into slaves, their possessions taken from the Roman authorities, which then changed what could have been, from a modern perspective, refugees that could have allied with you against the common enemy, the Huns. Well, they were turned into, once again, more hardened enemies. Not a great strategy. Julius Caesar would not be proud. These people sometimes would join local revolting peasant masses in a crescendo of chaos and devastation. In this terribly compromised picture, the warlords, who are exponents of the Romano-barbarian nobility, find ideal room for maneuver, exploiting their contracts, alliances, and kinships both inside and outside the Roman world, beginning a game for power aimed at securing control over the provinces of an empire now in shambles, but increasingly more appealing than the forests and steppes of the Barbaricum, with a view to establishing their own independent powers. All of this societal, political, and economic havoc will culminate in the birth of the Romano-barbaric kingdoms in the beginning of the Middle Ages. After having seen all of this, where do we place the presence of homosexuality within population clusters at a statistical level? There is no difference from that standpoint. Whether a brilliant tactician, such as, say, Hadrian, was gay or not changes nothing when it comes to his achievements and abilities and skills. The idea that Speaker of the House Johnson is trying to propose that it was a form of moral corruption that connects with homosexuality that made the empire falls ignores all of these positions. And if all of these things hadn't happened, whether they be gay or not, and by the way, the Romans were not all gays, this idea that the Romans were like, they were all gay and they were all accepting of homosexuality is a myth of itself. But even if it was the case, if all of this hadn't happened, gay or not, the empire wouldn't have fallen. Now, his position is clearly that he oftentimes underlines his position in the sense that, well, he's a Christian. So am I. I'm a Christian. but that doesn't mean that I'm going to change the facts or alter the way I interpret them. Gay people have always existed. The only difference is that there are specific situations and periods in history where if you were gay, you'd be killed, so they had to hide it. It's not that there were less gay people, it's that it was not advantageous to let people know. But if you think that being gay will make an empire fall, and if anyone looks at this closer and looks at the data and sources, you will see that just like today, also at the time of the Romans, the idea of same-sex relationships was accepted by some, condemned by others, and ignored by many. Because humans are humans, and civilizations do not change dramatically when it comes to these societal issues with just a couple of thousand years. Alright, noble ones, but I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please remember thumbs up, and if you're not yet a member of this community, become a noble one. Subscribe to my channel for more content from the Metatron. Thank you very much for watching, and remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.